Hey guys, Tom Henderson from RESGEN here, and I'm so excited that you're joining me for this episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. Before we get into the show today, I want to remind you that tickets for RESGEN Men's Summit 2025, which takes place on Saturday, February 1st from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., are on sale now at resgen.org. This annual RESGEN event gathers over 1,100 men right here in Sioux Falls and hundreds more online and at simulcast sites for a half day of encouragement, laughter, and challenge. This year's speakers include Ted Cunningham, Derwin Gray, Jordan Montgomery, Brian Loritz, and more. Tickets are only $40 and they will sell out, so head on over to resgen.org to get you and your friends registered as soon as you can. And while there, be sure to check out info about our couples event, Date Night Comedy, and maybe grab your tickets for that as well. All right, my guest today is a new friend of mine who introduced himself to me this past summer. And after having lunch and hearing a bit of his story, I just knew that I needed to introduce him to you. Benson Langat is a follower of Christ, a mental health therapist, and a running coach who moved to the U.S. from Kenya in 2009. On today's show, Benson and I discussed several topics, including what he experienced moving from Kenya to Kansas to go to school and run track for Butler College, how he came to be sponsored by Skechers shoes, and what compelled him to run across the state of South Dakota, not once, but twice, as a part of the 437 Project. We also talk about the important role that his grandfather played in his life, and what it was like being by his bedside during his final breath. I'm really excited for what this episode has in store for us. Here's my conversation with Benson Langat. Benson, it is so fun to have you on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, for sure. And I love how the story of how we met. I mean, I had heard your name and not knowing that you had come to the Men's Summit last year, but you were actually a guest on Sioux Falls late night talk show, Late Night Boomin', and Laura and I had come to that to view the event, and because my son is on the writing team or was on the writing team, and you were the guest, and it was so fun to see you just be you as a part of that. And I'm sure people can go check it out on YouTube.
For sure.
But we talked, and we talked afterwards, and you talked a little bit about just the Men's Summit and stuff. And so we're going to get into that later down the road. But I love the way that you and I were introduced. And I just knew, as I said in the intro, that I knew that I needed to introduce you to so many in the RESGEN audience that may not know who you are. And so that's where I really would love to start today, is I just would love for you to give a brief introduction of yourself to the audience. Obviously, you moved to the States in 2009, and we're going to talk all about that. But I just give a little intro of who Benson is.
Yes. Again, thanks for having me. Benson here. My accent could definitely tell you that I'm not from around here.
Yeah.
Born and raised in Kenya. I moved to the United States in 2009 on a scholarship to run in college here.
Yeah.
Went to college in Kansas, then transferred to University of South Dakota to finish my education there and running, and then moved to Sioux Falls. Interestingly, Sioux Falls was just a temporary place for me to, I got a job to work with some kids there, and I enjoyed that so much. And then I decided, hey, why not stay one more year?
Yeah.
1 year led into the other, and here I am. So,
And you've been here for how long now?
Since 2014 in Sioux Falls.
Yeah. So 1 year turned into 10 years.
Yes. And I love it now. Every year is always, always the thought of like, I wonder what it could be somewhere else, and I find myself back here. So,
yeah. Well, listen, from a guy who was basically raised here, moved here when I was 9, and then moved away to be a youth pastor in Oregon from 99 to 05, coming back to a place in 05, a place that we said at the time when we moved away that we will never come back.
Mm-hmm.
But being someone who now has been here and raised my kids here and, grown the ministry here and all this kind of thing, right? We just can't imagine living anywhere else. So yes. I'm hopeful that you will feel the same thing, because you are Just obviously, a very gifted individual, but you're a great contributor and asset to our community. And so I want you to hear that from me today, and I'm just grateful for the role that you play in our city, and just who you are as a person, as a friend. And I want to talk as we really get into this conversation today. I want to talk about just your faith journey
Mhm.
and how you came to faith. Because I think that that's just I love hearing that from people. I think we can all be encouraged from our faith stories. But I know that your grandfathers played a big role in that. And originally, you and I were going to record this podcast, probably about a month or so ago, if
Mhm.
I remember correctly. But one of those grandfathers, the second one,
Mhm.
passed away,
Yes.
and so we had to postpone it to today. But just let's talk about your faith journey here.
Yes, my faith was something that when I was born, my parents, of course, with the influence of my grandfather, Livingston Bongon, who is my dad's dad, and so I grew up in almost like 100 years next year. He has a really person of faith that brought the ministry into our region. He moved away from a place called Kericho, which is more in the southern part of Kenya, but he moved to the region where we live now. And basically, he was the pillar to the faith and Christianity around that region. So there were so many churches that were born out of what he brought.
Wow.
And so for us, it was at that moment there was no choice. You either get up or go to church, or you get basically, you didn't have a choice.
Okay.
And so
What year was that? When he came, that missionary
he
came and established those churches.
in the I believe the 70s or the early 80s
Okay.
came to the region. But I believe like he started small, and it started growing bigger and bigger and bigger. There's believe over 15, 20 churches that were born out of him coming to that region, and so where we live now.
Okay.
And so that was the moment for us. But when I was born, we were basically born into the church. We became part of the church, and my faith started then. And but my faith was more so like it was like part of a tradition, but part of growing up. You get up and you go to church, and so I was involved so much in the church. Um, Many people don't believe, but I was actually in the church choir.
Oh,
And then in high school, I was singing the choir.
okay. Do you
and-
still have a good voice, Benson? Do you still
Uh,
do you still sing at all?
I could sing in a group, but
Okay.
most of the time I just keep it to myself,
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where like the foundation of my faith started. And then I think he was reborn again later in life. And I think it's really this year when when I went back to take care of my grandfather in March.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it gave me a different perspective, really, of the legacy that he had lived and the work that he had done in the ministry world. And so for me, my faith started resurfacing again more from later in life, like things start to make sense now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You talk about your story of saying, you were born into the church and you haven't necessarily known life without the church, right?
Mhm.
And I think about even just where we live here, and some call this the Midwest, some call it the Plains.
Mhm.
I usually call it the Midwest. I don't. That's a question that I've all of a sudden started getting asked is,
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
think South Dakota is the Midwest or the Plains? But regardless of what you'd call it, there's a lot of people that grow up in the church and in the tradition, to use the word that you just used, the tradition of the church. But there's a point in all of our lives where we have to make a decision of saying, like, okay, is faith going to be just a tradition, or is it going to be the true foundation? And then beyond that, our faith is tied to a relationship with Christ. And so what you're telling me is that really over this last year that you've seen this become much more of a focus on the relationship and growing in your faith and your relationship with Christ than you have in the past.
Yes. And I think a lot of that too was for me at that moment was, growing up and even with my siblings, I felt like it was part of what we needed to do. growing up. And then coming to United States actually kind of shifted things a little bit, because when I came here, you can talk so much about faith. It almost felt like you're an outsider talking about faith, then or your belief system in a way. So then I just like felt like, wait a minute, like why is it different? And so that kind of put things a little bit down on, push things down a little bit. But then over time, like say it again, this shit started putting things out. I couldn't talk about my faith, however I wanted to, because for me, I was scared like maybe people would judge you based on that. But then that is something that I was hiding that I actually needed to bring it to light.
Okay.
And so that changed things a little bit for me.
Yeah. So it was the recognition of like, you have a part in that, and I need to step out and be courageous.
Yes.
In owning that. And then that really kind of unleashed some new growth.
Yes.
Even through that courageous step.
For sure. And I think that was, like you said, courageous is having to really say, that's who I am as a person.
Yeah.
Part of my biggest value is faith, and it's a faith in the Lord and faith in myself. And I think that hiding something wasn't being me. And so when I started bringing that, it just kind of felt like a flower that's like blooming. And it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You got to come out and say, and if faith is important to you with the Lord, say it out loud.
Oh.
And I think that is something that for me, I've started embracing a lot more. And actually, a friend of mine that I know well, talks about his faith so much is the mayor, Paul.
Yeah.
He talked about it like publicly. I'm like, if a leader like that can acknowledge it, why someone like me, like, why are you hiding it? And I think it put things in perspective for me as well.
The one of the verses that has always just meant a lot to me, that I would say, there's a couple of life verses that I have, and one of them being Matthew 5:16, and let your light so shine amongst men that they may see your good works.
Yes.
Not just so they could see your good works, but to glorify your Father in heaven.
For sure.
And which is really the scripture that, I mean, I don't know if you ever learned the song when you were a kid of this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Yes. We won't sing it for the listeners today. Although, now that I know that a singer, maybe we could do a duet someday, but it's common for us to think about that as a song that we sang as a child if we grew up in the church. But I think there's also this understanding that we need to have of saying that never should we, to quote the song, hide it under a bush. Oh no, yes. I'm going to let it shine. But somehow, I think as we get older, we begin to think, well, I don't know that I should let it shine, because that could hinder my ability to do something in business, or maybe hinder relationships, or I don't want to come off as super religious, yes, or whatever. But what we find is when we are really embracing, like, hey, this is who I am, and I don't want to hide back components of myself, like you just said, and leaning and being our true authentic selves. I like to put it this way, is that, authenticity leads to approachability. And so when you're being your most authentic self, that's just going to draw people to you, as opposed to, just thinking that that's going to repel them. Have you found that to be true for you?
And I feel like you said, like sometimes we hide that part because we feel like it might ruin some other opportunities out there. And honestly, like to your point, I think bringing the light shine helps lighten up everything else.
Yeah.
That's surrounding you, because really you turn on the light in the dark, it brightens everything that's around there. And for me, the faith is the light that if you turn it on, it brightens everything around it.
Oh, that's a good visual too. That's something that I think that'll be a great thing for us all to take with us, is, as we enter into a dark room, however dark it may be, do we light it up?
Yeah.
And that's so good. So when you and I had breakfast after the summit, and we just talked about just your life and the role of your grandfathers, and just, I think that there's something that there's differences in cultures, right? And so, and I find that so many people that I've met from other countries, there's maybe maybe a deeper focus or maybe a recognition of the importance of family. I think that in America, sometimes we become so fragmented
Mhm.
as we, spread out throughout the country. And we've already told our boys, boy, we really hope that, yes, that you will end up somewhere where mom and I live so that we can be a part of their lives long term. But, and have that interaction of a grandfather to our grandkids. And
Mhm.
so tell me about like just the role of your grandfathers in your life. And is that a fair assessment, saying that culturally that's maybe a little bit more of a focus in Kenya than it is in America?
I would say culturally, but also most so much focus also in terms of like who that person played the role in your life. There are people that honestly they're not connected in that level. But for me, my grandfather Livingston was my hero. He's my hero in so many ways. He's someone that really never went to school, but he's opening a book every single day. He's you could look at his Bibles that he's read. I mean, he read every single afternoon. He's sitting for 2 to 3 hours
Mm.
reading his Bible, reading his other books. I mean, that he was so much into the reading part that for me now, I picked that up later in life and I enjoy reading now. I read a lot of books now. Part of that is I came to realize your started with him. Many things that came out of my grandfather was also the concept of like, like the person he was. I At this funeral, I shared that he lived a beautiful life. He lived a very well lived life. He impacted people in so many ways. And also, he impacted me because I grew up watching him and the things that he would do. Like, every Friday, I used to iron his clothes for him. And he was very, very specific on how he wanted them. And for me, that was a learning moment because every weekend now, not Fridays, I iron my clothes because it's about the presentation, the person you are, and more so the lessons that he was teaching me that I saw at that time and were punishment because I didn't want to iron clothes.
Yeah,
I would rather
exactly.
be doing other things. But he would do things that I now look back and I'm like, he was really preparing me for so many things that I do in life now that I'm like, that was what my grandfather was helping me. So I guess in short, for me to really say is my grandfather was a father figure to me in just so many ways. He pointed so many things in my life. I mean, at this funeral, we had over 4,000 people in attendance and a lot of thousands streaming online. So he was not just somebody of just like the family. He was also had given his life to the community. He has given his time and effort to the ministry. And the lessons that he taught everybody, people still share stories about him that this is what he did to me. So I get to really take away a lot of the things that he taught me.
Mm.
And I could just imagine what he did to other people.
Oh, that is such a beautiful story. And what you're speaking of is legacy,
Yes.
right? I mean, the legacy that he left. And if you were to, I mean, you would probably still be there right now talking to every single one of them if you would have been able to go person to person to person to
Yes.
person, right?
Yeah.
And hear the 4,000 stories that were represented. And even just like hearing you share that, and I could, feel the emotion in your
Yeah.
voice and
Yeah.
the, fighting back, just the tears, just because of the role that he played, and how much he meant to you, and how you continue to honor him and what he taught you, even through a simple task of ironing,
Yeah.
which, by the way, I hate ironing. And but now I'm questioning having a steamer instead, because
Yeah.
maybe I should have an iron, because then I can become more like you and your grandfather. But the just even as you do that, you're thinking of him.
I
And,
do.
and I think that's just a given, right? I think
Yes.
as you put in the distilled water and the
Yeah.
steamer and the different
Yeah.
things, that I mean, you're thinking of him.
Yes. And I think so many things from him that I sometimes sit back and think about. When I'm getting ready to speak, I would talk with, my grandfather. It's like, he's so excited for me because he did the public speaking. He did so many things, but he would guide me and tell me, Benson, this is what You need to relax. You need to, my first ever public speaking that I did, he told me, if they're not wearing a suit, you need to wear a certain suit. And I did that. And then for me, every single thing I bring it with me, like something that is so, I bring in my grandfather with me in just so many ways. And I'm like, I can hear him, I can see him, and I can also see him getting excited for me because we really grew really close.
Mm.
And I'll tell you this, when I would leave Kenya, every time I visit, he would read me Psalms 23 every single time. And I didn't really understand why, but until it passed, and after the funeral, I left the following day because I had stayed 5 weeks. I needed to get back. Nobody read me Psalms 23, but I opened Psalms 23 for myself before I left, and I read it where he would normally read the verse to me. He had a spot, and really just like for me, that's my favorite verse.
Yeah.
And so I say that because when he was at the hospital, he stayed at the hospital for 3 weeks. I was there. I would read him Psalms 23 every single day. And at that moment, he was not able to speak, but I could see him nodding his head. So for me, that gave me joy. And so I bring him with him everywhere, really just somebody that really, really changed your life for the better. And that was him.
Brother, you're getting me emotional over here. Just even like I got that picture in my mind of you sitting in that hospital reading that over him, and there's just something special. We'll do at the end of our time here. We do something called the final word, right? And you'll have the opportunity to give one here at the end of our time together today. But I don't always share the story of why I call it that, but the reason I call it that is because I think about so often. It's the words that we finally hear from people that we remember the most, both good and bad, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean like the final words you ever hear, but the words that you heard each time you left were Psalm 23. For me, like when my grandfather passed away, prior to him passing away, one of the final things he ever said to me, and he died of a heart attack, and so I wasn't able to be near him when he did, but he was very influential in my life and was very influential in my family's life, moving me back to Sioux Falls when I was 9, when my dad left, and so he was a father figure to me as well, and so I resonate with that. But I just remember when some of the words that he shared, and just saying, Tom, here's the deal. I'm not going to always be here, and you're the man of the house, and you need to take care of your mom and 2 sisters.
Yeah.
And how those words were weighty and they were heavy, but they were important. And for you to be able to hear those words consistently from your grandfather, and then to do that for him in his final days here on this earth, a life that was well lived. And in honor to the Lord, I just have to feel that has to have been so special to him as well. So, man, that's beautiful.
Believe it or not, 2 years ago today, popped up in my memory. We were having our breakfast together, my little brother Wesley, my cousin Micah, and we were all sitting together. That was 2022. I'd gone home after the 437 project just to process things a little bit.
Yeah.
And we sat, and that was the moment, was the last time we all sat together, and he was giving us a story. And I wish I had more of those moments. I wish I had more sit downs. He liked sitting down and talking.
Yeah.
And for me, the reason I mentioned that is the part that for me, when I would go home, I would spend as much time as I can with the people I know, because I don't get the luxury of getting up today and just going. But I think every single moment for me, given those same situations of what was happening at that time, I think it was a message from God. Because I hadn't gone home for 10 years since I came to the U.S. Then after that, I've probably gone every year, and this year I've gone home twice. And every single time, it was a pathway to really unlocking different doors to these things or realizations that I've realized about our family, our grandfather, and more so, like, I say this to say, Jeremiah 29, for I know the plans that I have for you. God has really pointed out for me, and I'm seeing that because He made, like, God gave me this opportunity to go back home in March when I was just going to see Him, but also the opportunity to stay. My grandfather passed away he passed away when I was right at the hospital with my brother. And I think it was just God wanting me to witness that
Mm.
because I had the fear of losing someone I know when I'm not there. So for me going, I gave it all. I gave it all financially. With my time, I lost so much weight just from being at the hospital. I was actually admitted at the hospital because of fatigue and tiredness.
Mm.
And for me, that was giving it all to take care of my grandfather. And so for me, when he passed away, I did not feel any sense of like weight on me. I know he was going to be with the Lord.
Mm.
And so for me, the moment that I gave it all, it was God's plan to take me from the US, go back to Kenya, take care of him with my other relatives. But when he passed away, I think it was the timing that God wanted me to be there to witness, because I don't know how I would feel if I was here.
Yeah.
And, so I think it's like things happen for a reason, but God puts you in places.
Yes.
And so then out of everything has happened since then for me, I'm like, thank God, that's God's plan. That's God's plan. He's putting things here. Of course, you can question some things,
Yeah, of course.
but then you're like, who am I to question?
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's so good. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It really is a beautiful story, and I'm proud of you for just really trying to live
Thank
out
you.
the legacy that he left, and just the reminder of man, how are we devoting time, and you just mentioned, like, listen, I laid it all on the line, and I wanted to be there for 5 weeks for my family and all of that, because at the end of the day, like, it's like that's what we take with us is relationships. So many times we can just be on this rat race of trying to accumulate,
Yes.
right? But that gets in the way of just devoting time. Like you just said, I just loved to just sit with my grandfather, and he loved to talk and tell stories.
Yes.
And we don't take time often enough to just sit and tell stories and listen to stories. And we have this, we can fall into the trap of believing that we'll always have tomorrow, right? Tomorrow will always come, but there is no guarantees.
Yes.
And so that's a great reminder for all of us today. So you mentioned, you had not, there was a time where you had not gone back to Kenya for like 10 years, but then you started going back more frequently. So I want to talk about just your move from Kenya to the U.S.
Yes.
Where initially it was in Kansas, and then you eventually transferred to the University of South Dakota after that. But what was the experience like moving from Kenya to the U.S. for you? How did, like, what was, I'm sure there were some things that were shocking. I'm sure there was just some adjustments, both minor and major, you had to make. But just what was that experience like?
Man, he was scary. Basically, you have a handbag of clothes and just to change, and you leave your country. My mom at that time, and my dad and my uncle, and my now best friend who lives in Illinois, they were all at the airport seeing me off for the last time. I had not been on a plane ever, and to take my first flight, I went through Turkey and then North Carolina, where I just visited with my uncles for 2 weeks or so before I went to Kansas. But I think one of the biggest shock for me at that time was really how people, it was wintertime. So it's not so many people. It's hard to see people. And I'm like, where's everybody else? And so when I landed in Kansas, that was like first time seeing snow. And I was sat on the window, like in the plane, and I was like, I don't think I want to stay here. Anyway, coach picked me up. Coach Hunter, who's now coaching at Wichita State, picked me up. We went to eat, and I had only $20 in my pocket.
So you came here with $20 and one bag of clothes.
just a hand. And of course, my uncle had given me some other clothes.
Okay.
But I had this one heavy jacket that I ended up losing it. But then I had a bag, $20. I didn't have a job at the moment. I ended up getting a job at working as a supervisor at the gym. But the $20 for me, talk about making decisions, right? I lost my coat, but then I had the decision to make. Do I buy food or do I buy a new jacket? It's winter time. For me, that was one of the hardest decisions that I had to make. In the beginning. It's either I give up to go buy food or I give up to go get a jacket. And for me at that moment was one of the biggest things that really helped me was what's the priority right now. I got connected to a family there, down in Kansas, Peggy, and the family was really good. Connected me to the church where they gave me some clothes, which was good. So I'm glad I spent money on my food. But it was so hard in just so many ways, like navigating those logistics. I'm out in the middle of nowhere by myself. I don't even have access to so many things, vehicles. I didn't know how to drive. I didn't have a vehicle. It's winter, and I had to walk everywhere. I'm someone who, at that time, I was someone who you asked me for a ride, I'll tell you, no, I'm good, because I didn't want to bother you. And so that challenge was hard. And the funny one that I've shared before was I was standing in New York City. I needed to take an elevator, and first time experiencing an elevator. And I shared that at the late night boom.
Yeah.
But I had to knock on the elevator because I didn't know how to get it to open. And so that's some things that I laugh about sometimes, and then I asked for chips instead of fries, and they give me potato chips instead of actually fries, because just the difference of the terms that you use. And so part of those challenges is navigating that, but also like going grocery shopping and a lot of that. For me, what helped me was I was a quick learner. So that was the earliest stages of coming here. But man, I met a phenomenal team down in Kansas.
So they were your teammates?
Yeah, the teammates.
Okay.
Cross-country team. We connected so well. That made things a lot better. And I noticed that to really work, to really adapt very well in an environment, you need people.
Yeah.
And that's what has really helped me kind of, from Kansas to coming to South Dakota. It's just being like, surround yourself with people, and the communities, man, it's just like from a running community to leadership communities that I've been part of. It's so amazing.
Yeah.
And so it's made the process a lot easier for me. Yes.
And you've mastered elevators now.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So, and there's obviously all the things that you came that were unknown, that were new, you eventually learned.
Yes.
And so even though there was fear, you continue to put one step in front of the other. And I think even that is just a great reminder of saying that, in our lives, we'll have fearful moments, but we keep moving forward. And we keep learning, and we keep surrounding ourselves with other people. We've got to be open to connecting with other people and allowing them into our lives. You said a couple of things there that I wanted to mention. Was you said, at that time, if someone were to say, "Hey, do you need a ride?" I would say no, right? Not now, because you didn't want to bother them, right? You didn't want to be an inconvenience.
Yes.
But there's power in learning that, to say, like, listen, I can ask for help.
Yes.
I can be a recipient of help. And I think help, and sometimes sometimes we don't want to receive the help because we're like, no, we're the ones that give help.
Yeah.
No, we're the ones that, should be helping other people. And I'm not really in need, or I'm not really worthy of help. But what we're doing is we're robbing them of a gift, and we're robbing ourselves of a gift as well.
Yes.
And potentially even relationship.
And a lot of that is we make assumptions so much. And assumption gets us into a point where, I don't want to ask for help because I think I'm bothering them. Well, you don't know that. You don't know that. And so I think, to your point, we get in a cage and we put ourselves in those cages because we think we got it all. But sometimes we just need to give somebody a hand and say, here you go.
Mm-hmm.
I have your back. It's okay. Like, and I think that's what has really helped me, with the growth process. Because honestly, I'll tell you one thing that was a struggle for me was my accent and how I would express myself. I think that and so many people who, think about it, if you get up today, I went to China,
Yeah.
people might have a hard time understanding you,
Right.
know? And so for me, I felt that I was minimizing myself so much from being courageous to stand up and express myself or say things publicly. And that's something that I've worked on over time, because I feel like that's been the biggest part of me now, is the courage to stand up. That whatever you have is a gift, whether if you're short, if you're tall, if you have an accent, if you don't have an accent. We're all different in just so many ways. But I think it took a lot of courage to accept that Benson, you're not gonna be, you're not gonna be the person you cannot be somebody you're not. And I'll tell you a story quick. I was having a hard time adjusting to the dress code in the U.S. I was like, people of African American descent, I was seeing them like they dress a certain way. So I had to conform with that, which at that time, not everybody, right? But it's a college scene. So I had to buy Timberlands. I had to buy, it was trying to belong. I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
And then I got called out by my professor saying, Benson, what is wrong with you? Are you okay? And I said, no, I'm good. He said, you're dressing, that's not your dressing. And part of me was trying to belong instead of just saying, Benson, have the courage to be you. It took me 2 days of pretending to be that person. But then it took a lot of courage to say, accept the person right there. And so for me, that's been a learning. It's continuing to be the courage to, hey, it's okay. You're Benson.
Yeah.
Be that.
Man, dude, I'm telling you what, man, we're about halfway through this thing. You've been dropping dimes already. That's like mic drop right there. We could end the whole thing and be like, all right, let's go home. That was a good day's work. But I'm just telling you, like that's such a powerful word, because the reality is that, I even think about Romans chapter 12, right? Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that was something that's just like the temptation that we all have to conform to the environments that we're in. And sometimes that costs us maybe who we really are. But we do it because we feel like an outsider.
Yeah.
And as you're sharing that, I think about just how are you and I, as just we're in different spaces, how are we trying to create environments where people don't feel like an outsider, where they feel like, man, I am accepted and I'm loved by the people in this room because of who I am.
Yes.
And who God has created me to be. Obviously, we know that we find acceptance in Christ, and He says, "Listen, come to me as you are, and I'm just going to slowly transform you." But man, I think that the power that you and I have each day to say, are we going to create environments that are giving life to others, that are allowing them to experience just the freedom to be them? And I think about that even in parenting. Are we allowing our kids to be who they were created to be, as opposed to who we really want them to be, right? And I think as a therapist, again, I'm sure you're having conversations with individuals all the time, and I know that even there was difficult conversations I had to have with my boys, where they say, Dad, I feel like you just want me to be this or that, or more like you, or whatever. And man, those were real conversations that I needed to take seriously, because, man, they're supposed to be who God created them to be. As parents, we're to help kind of build a foundation and love them, encourage them, correct them when they're wrong, all those things, and help shape them. But we're not the potter.
Yeah.
The Lord's the potter.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we're the parent. He's the potter.
Yeah.
So that is a beautiful. And I think I've said beautiful more in this podcast than I've had in any other one, because you're laying it down today. You're just laying it down. So, I want to transition because I've never had a sponsored athlete on the podcast before, but I have one now.
Yeah.
In that you're sponsored by Skechers. I used to wear Skechers back in the day, but they were more like of the office variety, not of the athletic variety. But how did it come about that you became a sponsored athlete for them?
It's a funny thing is I look back now and I'll just start with this is I grew up with no shoes, right? I used to admire shoes so much. I had a pair that I would just wear once. And that shoe was like, you outgrow it because you're young and you save it for weddings, church, and then you stay barefoot, right? Now, then I get a lot of shoes. I'm like, okay, like this is cool, right?
Yeah.
But honestly, I think it's, it's just, again, the power of having the courage to step up and, challenge yourself in some things such as running, I was running in 2018 and I was at that time working at 605 running company and happened to know one of the best runners Skechers was sponsoring. And so just that connection part of Skechers and so 605 running company started carrying Skechers. So I met Adam, who's the sales rep. He lives in Colorado, amazing guy. We were talking and we started talking about looking at my times, and it's like, Benson, I think you make the team, and so been part of Skechers since then. And
when you say times, I'm sorry to interrupt, but when you say like I've been looking at your times, this is for
half marathon.
For half marathon, so
yes.
13.1 miles.
Yes.
So he's saying your times are in the sponsored athlete category.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And that was like 2017, 2018. Now the times have changed really fast. And so yes, I've been part of the team since then. And I've been part of some really cool stuff that they do. To put it in perspective, in 2021, I believe, 2019-ish, 2021, that period right there was this wave of making carbon-plated shoes. So they have put a carbon plate in a shoe.
Yeah.
And I was one of the professional wear testers for them that would give feedback in terms of like what they need to do and what they need to change. And it was very cool to be part of that because when that came out, the shoe sold out in 24 hours. So
yeah,
and it was one of the first ever shoe that they ever made in carbon plate, So yeah, it's so many things to be part of that. That's been really cool.
Right. Okay. Well, listen, if they want anybody that can run like a, sub 7 minute mile, you can give them my number. All right. So
I don't think it works like that, but you never know.
Well, I'm gonna believe that maybe it can because I know you. But anyway, that's so fun. As the your running career has been, I mean, running's been a part of your life for a very, very long time. I mean, you obviously moved from Kenya to run in college, and you've continued to run. And someone who is also working in the mental health space and a therapist, the importance of mental health, and you've been a part of a couple of really cool projects. You already mentioned it one time when you said that you went home to Kenya after running one of these. But it's a project called the 437 Project. That you've been a part of it in a couple different ways. Number one, you ran, was it 2 years in a row?
2 years.
2 years in a row, you ran the 437 is 437 miles across the entire state of South Dakota. You said, you know what, people do it once. But I'm not just any people. Like I'm doing it twice. I'm going to knock it out 2 years in a row. And then this last year, you really served more as a coach and as a driver for the participants in it. And the 437 Project is really about creating mental health awareness. Is that correct? I mean, so tell me where the vision for the 437 Project came from and why you chose to be a part of it in the first place.
The vision was, the mayor, we were talking about something else in 2021. I was telling him about a run that I would do to support the Brian Boys for Hope I had come out of Leadership South Dakota, and I had this thought that I wanted to run by him. We were just sharing a moment. And then, he had talked about it before, but he had said, Benson, we got to run across the state, but we didn't know for what reason. So his vision came.
That statement just right there is a hilarious one.
Yeah.
You know what we should do? And it wasn't like, well, here's what we should do. It's like, we have to. Like, we've got to run across the state.
Yeah.
That's a funny statement to me.
Yes. I mean, at that time, it was really like, I was trying to picture it, but it wasn't, for me, running would be like, of course, I can do that.
Yeah.
Like, but then to really put the logistics back and start to think about how that would be, I mean, he had an incredible vision of like, we could do it from one corner of the state to the other. So I'm really grateful that I was asked to be part of it in the beginning process of like the planning of everything, seeing how it was, it was everything else coming together from the first year, even to running it. So we went from helping with the planning to having to run the project itself. So to have incredible runners, I mean, we didn't know what it was going to happen. And thank God, like everything worked out really well. And I mean, that vision was just like, I see it now, even getting bigger and bigger because of the impact.
Yeah.
And the impact that it's had on so many people, like it's amazing.
Yeah. And it really, to create awareness of the importance of good mental health, right?
Yes. And at that time, we were coming up from COVID. The mayor had kicked off the mayor's 100-day, 100-mile challenge. And then there was a big, he's a visionary guy. At least I think he is.
Yeah, totally.
He sees something and expands it. And I mean, to reach across the state, more so people who might not be willing to ask for help, the farmers out there, small towns. And to bring the community together in one message to say, it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
Was more powerful.
Yeah.
And for me to be asked to do that, it was easy for the running part of it. It's now to think about how many people, I mean, it blew my mind just knowing the statistics alone. That 1 in every 5 people in America is struggling with mental health. Like somebody, honestly, you go down today, 5 people, you shake their hands. That is that part of it. And so it's a crisis in our state. It's, suicide had become one of the leading causes of death here before. So there's a need. And when you see a need in an African culture, they say, when you cry out for help where there's a need, you got to rally around that. And that was an outcry at that time. And for me, that I had to show up.
Yeah.
Not one time, not twice, but 3 years now. Do it again if they ask me to.
Yeah. And this year, like I said, I mean, you moved into more of the coaching and the driving role, probably because of the other things that were going on.
Yeah.
And so again, there's just so many things there that we could unpack. But even just that whole idea of just, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And the reality is, and I remember you saying this at breakfast when you and I were together, Benson, when you were like, the reality is that we're all empty in some area. We're all feeling at a loss. We're all struggling in one area or another, no matter what kind of mask we wear, no matter what kind of facade or how we present ourselves. There's some challenge that everyone has, but the word empty stuck out to me. And when something is empty, it needs to be filled, and so your desire to fill others, and obviously you do that in your daily work with your therapy and as a mental health therapist, but it just caused me to think about just what needs are we seeing every day, as listeners are listening or watching right now. We all come across different needs. Because we're not all in the same place.
Yes.
We're all in different places, and there's all different needs that are represented in those places we're in. The question is will we do what you did when you said yes to doing the first 437 project? Am I going to meet that need or fill that need or whatever.
Mhm.
That can't just be an African culture thing.
Yeah.
That needs to be an American culture thing.
Yes.
And how are we recognizing, opening our eyes and seeing needs first, but then what potential would I have
Yeah.
to maybe meet that need?
And I think part of that, it's the word that is ringing in my head so many times is the word letting go and the word surrender. Mostly it's what are we willing to surrender to let something else take the place of it. We live in a world of abundance, information overload. We get information from you walk out right here, gonna get information. But from my work that I've done, either from coaching or even with my work with clients in the mental health profession, is it's having that door to open up and say, I gotta let this go. So then something else takes the place of it. And many people sometimes have a hard time of letting go, opening that door to let something out so something else can come in. And part of that what could be coming in could be just the fresh air. The reason I say it's okay to not be okay is you might just need a fresh air. And that fresh air could change a lot of things. And the word surrender is to surrender, to open that door, to let something else come in. And I think that's the struggle that I see that we face so much in our society these days and I see honestly like African culture, it's getting there. It's how do we really say it's okay to be you? It's okay to ask for help, because asking for help is the surrender to say, I know I can figure this out. Can you help me? Can you give me the hand? And I think I look at the project as a way of allowing people to say, me too, I need help in this way.
Yeah.
I need to call 211 because I'm surrendering this shame that I have inside me that so-and-so is going to think about me this way. But to say, I'm surrendering, now I need help.
Yeah.
And I think the project just puts itself out there in just that way to give people a space to surrender, to get the help.
Well, as you know, I mean, that word means a lot to me personally. And that was a word that was that was really what the Men's Summit this past year ended up being. And, it was all about just, being men of courage. And what was interesting was as I was getting into how I was going to kick off the event this last year, I was all about like, it's going to be this kind of a message. It's going to be all this like messages out of scripture about being strong and being all this. But what God kept on bringing me back to was an experience that I had, last fall, and how our true freedom is through surrender, and that it takes courage for us as men to surrender. And that was kind of where, you had talked about just you coming for the very first time to the Men's Summit and just me really talking about the end of it. And that was such a huge blessing to me, but like the role that played in just understanding of, man, we just have to get better at surrendering as men.
Yes.
And say, what do we need to leave?
And I think that's a really good point, because I've actually taken that since we last talked, and I've taken it to another level in a way. Like you mentioned, like you went, you had gone up the mountains. It's like, what can I leave here? And at the conference, you had people write something and leave it there. I've taken upon myself, it's like, when I leave here today, what is something that I need to live? And so I like now, I chew gum occasionally. And part of me doing that is the gum wrapper.
Yeah.
I write something that I need to let go. As I chew gum, I'll chew for a few minutes while I process whatever that I need to let go. And then I get to a place and I'm like, it has to stay here.
Yeah.
And really the freedom that you get knowing that I left it over there, I'm not going to go get it back. If there's something that's still bothering me, I need to still work on it. And then if it gets to a point where I really got to talk to somebody, I know the person to call. And I think the point of getting to that place is what so many people struggle with. And I think the conference, phenomenal experience, and I've told you how I feel about it. One of the best, things that I've ever attended. Like, how do you get men to just like show up? You know, it's like super cool, right? But I think that for me, that was something that I took away that I've actually shared with so many people about, like, what is one thing that we could leave here today?
Yeah.
That's just a point of really, your point, surrender.
Yeah. Well, and the, sometimes it's, I talked about my struggle with perfectionism and performance. And a lot of that has to do with because of just my childhood and a lot of things in my past. And then, and that's some of those things I have to lay that down every morning saying, God, help me understand that you don't love me because of doing things perfect or my performance, but it's your grace and your love that you offer freely, regardless. And so, the beauty is as we get more comfortable doing that, God begins to really allow us to understand what true freedom comes, which is such a great thing. But, well, my friend, I've heard so many good things. One of the things that personally I'm going to take with me, and it was something that just kind of snuck in, but you just said, when everything was going on with your grandfather, and you said, "What's my priority right now?" And I thought that was such a good word, because especially in a world that's so fast paced, and where we just the temptation is to say so many times, "I don't have time. I just don't have time." I don't know, because we have all this stuff going on, right? And we fill time, and oftentimes we end up wasting time. So it's not really about time management. It's about priority management. And what is my priority right now? So that was, for me, something that was really influential, and something that I'm going to take from this conversation. There were so many other nuggets that I know that individuals are going to be taking from this conversation and implementing and thinking about and marinating on. So I'm so appreciative of you doing that. I'd love for you to, like, as I mentioned, we have kind of a thing that we do here called the final word. And I would just love for you just to share a kind of a final word and anything that's on your heart. I mean, in any direction. Could be encouragement, could be scripture, could be just something else that you really came locked and loaded and say, "Man, I hope I get to talk about this today." But what kind of final word would you have for individuals today?
That's something that, I was thinking about it, like, now that you mention it, and the word that comes into my mind is just that awareness. That I'm really grateful that as a person, as I experience this life, to really become more aware of the events that are going on, that those events would trigger different thoughts going on into your mind, and then that would lead into emotions. And really knowing that God is just, God is using you to experience His life. It's okay that you might not get it all together someday. But some days it's okay to say, "Hey, I really need help." And to really be that person that says, "I am okay, not being okay." That knowing that your faith with your God and yourself is what's going to get you through all these events. And I think for me, that's something that I've been practicing, is losing my grandfather. That was a tragic event. But also becoming aware of that event for me has helped me grow. And by doing that is bringing that awareness that my thoughts is missing him. My thoughts is like, I'm not going to see him again. Emotions of sadness, but then I allow the pain to pass through me. By really having faith in the Lord and faith in myself.
Yeah. Well, brother, I'm appreciative of your friendship. Thanks for sharing this time with myself and listeners. And I can't just thank you for the role that you play in so many people's lives, including my own. And I can't wait to see you at this year's Men's Summit. I'm sure I'll see you before, but I'm excited for you to bring a crew with you and be a part of it once again. So thanks just for who you are.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Benson today. If you'd like to connect with him more, you can find him at Benson Langat on both Facebook and LinkedIn, and at BenRun26.2 on Instagram. All right, y'all, that's all for today. Be sure to get yourself registered for our RESGEN Men's Summit and Date Night Comedy events, and then I'll see you next time for another episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. Until then, continue being men whose life in Christ gives life to others.